Good evening, everyone. If we could just take our seats, we're about to get started. Well, thank you, everyone, for attending. It's always good to see a crowd that's interested in the state of affairs in their municipality. I'm William Tigert. I'm the current Director of Planning and Development for the town of Pelham, and I'll be facilitating the meeting this evening. So our first order of business is I'm going to call on Jennifer, Sturton to do the land acknowledgement, please.
Good evening. We begin this meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people.
Thanks, Jennifer. So before I get started, I'm just going to introduce the head table. So on my right is Mr. Nick McDonald, President of Meridian Planning. On my left is David Cribbs, CIO for the municipality, and Jennifer Sturton is our in-house legal counsel. So I have a number of opening remarks, so I will just get to those, and we'll have plenty of opportunity for participation later in the meeting. So thanks very much for attending. This public meeting is part of a process initiated by the town to amend the zoning bylaw to further and continue regulate cannabis industrial hemp production in the town of Pelham. The proposed zoning bylaw amendments are based on the work done in consultation with the former Cannabis Control Committee, which was established by Council in 2019 and completed its mandate in 2022. That work was done in consultation with Mr. McDonald and his firm, and he will be speaking to the amendment and providing some information to the group tonight to make sure that there's a full understanding of what's being proposed is consistent and the same as what has been previously dealt with by Council. In August of 2022, the Ontario Land Tribunal issued an interim order approving a version of these regulations that contained specific provisions that had been negotiated by the town and the local cannabis companies, but withheld final approval as additional action by the cannabis company was required before the regulations could be implemented. In April of 2023, the current Town of Pelham zoning bylaw came into effect, and in order to incorporate the regulations related to the cannabis and industrial hemp regulations as approved by the Ontario Land Tribunal into the current zoning bylaw, the town is following the Planning Act to now do so. This public meeting is an important part of the process as it provides an opportunity for you, the residents, to ask questions and provide feedback to Council on the proposed amendments, which will regulate this industry in the town of Pelham for the years coming forward. The proposed amendments do not address odor or building permit requirements for cannabis producers because those are not land use matters that can be regulated by a zoning bylaw. You might want to keep that in mind as you provide input tonight on the proposed zoning amendment that's before Council. Town staff are here with the help of Mr. McDonald to listen and answer questions, and work closely with the former members of the Cannabis Control Committee is also here to help. After this public meeting, staff will develop a final version of the proposed amendments that will incorporate the extensive work done by the committee and Council staff and the feedback that's received this evening. The proposed amendments will then be provided to Council for consideration to ensure that these important regulations are clearly and directly approved by the elected Town of Pelham's Council and incorporated into its new comprehensive zoning bylaw. I want to advise residents that they can continue to follow this process and the updates at the dedicated Town of Pelham website, pelham.ca/ZBL Cannabis. Now, before I turn the floor over to Mr. McDonald to run us through the amendment, I just have to deal with a little bit of procedural notification and make sure all the requirements of the Act are followed. So the Planning Act under Section 34 mandates that Council holds one public meeting for the purpose of informing the public in respect of the proposed zoning bylaw, and that the public have given an opportunity to provide comment and concerns to Council. This public meeting is actually being held to satisfy those requirements. Notice of the statutory public meeting were published on June 6, 2024, on the town's website and social media platforms, on the Cannabis Amendment Project page on Engaging Pelham, and posted digitally on the Voice of Pelham's website at pelhamtoday.ca. Additionally, a copy of the notice was emailed to the former members of the Cannabis Control Committee, all mandatory agencies, and mailed to the current cannabis producers in the Town of Pelham. In addition to providing information, the town will also receive any comments which any member of the public may wish to offer prior to the decision being made by Council. If you wish to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please contact the clerk's office in writing as soon as possible following this meeting, and contact information is available on the town's website and will also be displayed on the last slide of the presentation this evening. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Town of Pelham to the Ontario Land Tribunal, but the person or the public body does not make oral submissions at the public meeting or make written submissions to the Town of Pelham before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. In closing, I'd like to stress that at no point has any decision been made on the proposed amendments to date, and therefore any comments that are made by the public prior to Council's final decision will be considered by Council in forming that decision. So I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Mr. McDonald to run you through the amendment that he was principal architect when he worked closely with the Cannabis Control Committee and adopted, and now being reconsidered and adopted within our current comprehensive zoning bylaw. So I'll leave it up to Mr. McDonald to introduce himself and lead you through some of that history and background and where we are today. So I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. My name is Nick McDonald. I'm a registered professional planner. I'm the president of Meridian Planning Consultants, and I can confirm that my firm was retained by the town to prepare and then support an amendment to the town's official plan and zoning bylaw that I then presented to the Ontario Land Tribunal, at which the tribunal then approved those amendments. So I have quite a bit of history with respect to the official plan amendment that applies and the zoning bylaw amendment that is proposed this evening. So I do have a presentation. Next slide, please. And what I propose to do this evening is to provide a brief overview of the process that led to the preparation of the town-initiated official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendments in July of 2020. I'll provide a brief overview of both the official plan amendment, which is in effect, and the zoning bylaw amendment that was approved by the Ontario Land Tribunal on August 23rd of 2022. I'll review the proposed zoning bylaw that is the subject of this meeting tonight, and confirm that the proposed zoning bylaw is exactly in the form that I recommended to the Ontario Land Tribunal when I gave evidence in January of 2020. Next slide. So a little bit of history. There's obviously a lot of history around this topic, as evidenced by the number of people here tonight. Cannabis was and continues to be a significant issue, not only in this town, but in many other municipalities in Ontario, particularly after cannabis was legalized in 2017. In October of 2018, the town passed an interim control bylaw, and that was bylaw 4046-2018, the purpose of which was to prohibit the use or expansion of cannabis uses in the town, and this bylaw was later extended to July 2020. Municipalities passed these kinds of bylaws to allow for a study to be undertaken to determine how best to deal with that particular land use from an official plan perspective and from a zoning bylaw perspective. And a number of municipalities passed similar bylaws at around that same time as a consequence of the development and startup of a number of cannabis facilities in Ontario. Prior to the passage of that interim control bylaw, 2 facilities had indeed been established in the town already. One was known as Can Trust at that time on Balfour Street, and the second was Redican on Foss Road. And those facilities were up and running and operating when the interim control bylaw was passed by Council. In spring of 2019, Council formed the Cannabis Control Committee, you've just heard a little bit about, to provide advice on an approach to the development of new cannabis uses in the town. Considerable work was prepared and completed by the Cannabis Control Committee. It was very well done, in my opinion, on the development of the land use study through to February of 2020. My firm was retained in January of 2020 after a lot of the work was done to review the work that was completed and prepare a final official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for Council's consideration. I then took the work that the Cannabis Control Committee worked on and prepared. I modified it such that I felt very comfortable about it being defensible at the Ontario Land Tribunal, and then presented that final work to the Council of the Town of Pelham in July of 2020, at which time they approved both an official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment. Both, of course, were appealed by the cannabis companies in the town, plus another company who wished to develop a cannabis facility in the town. So we had 3 appeals. And prior to the hearing of the appeals, we made a number of minor changes to the amendment to ensure it was as defensible as possible before going to the tribunal and providing evidence. And the actual hearing itself on both the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment was held on January 24th to 27th and July 25th, 2022. And then in a decision dated August 23rd, 22, both the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment were approved by the Ontario Land Tribunal. I should say that the instruments approved by the tribunal have now been relied upon and copied by a number of other municipalities in Ontario because it did reflect the best in class in terms of official plan policy and zoning bylaw amendment regulation at the time. And I'll explain what that means in a moment. Next slide, please. So the official plan amendment is not before us today. It is already in effect, but the official plan amendment provides direction to how the zoning bylaw actually works and operates in this particular context. So I want to explain a little bit about the official plan amendment first, and then I'll talk about the zoning bylaw amendment that we're here tonight to listen to and provide comments on. So the purpose of the official plan amendment was to establish permissions for indoor cannabis and indoor industrial hemp cultivation in the agricultural area subject to a zoning bylaw amendment, and to establish criteria to be relied upon when considering such applications in the future. It very much was a forward-looking amendment that was intended to establish rules that would have to be complied with before any new cannabis producer was allowed to set up shop in the town. The official plan amendment recognized that the cultivation of cannabis was and is an agricultural use, and I know some folks may have other opinions on that, but it is an agricultural use, and that's how we looked at it. However, in the absence of any provincial guidance on how to mitigate and minimize the impacts, particularly from the odor from cannabis facilities, we recommended in the official plan amendment that such uses not be permitted as of right in the implementing zoning bylaw. Now, for those of you who may not understand what an official plan is and what a zoning bylaw is, there are two planning documents that basically control how land use is approved in the town. The first is your official plan, and it's a policy document, and it sets out where things can be permitted. It also sets out the conditions under which development can be permitted. And then the zoning bylaw establishes the exact rules under which that use can be developed on a property by property basis. So that's why we have two documents, and that's why I'm talking about both of them. So as a consequence, the real purpose of the official plan amendment, again, was forward thinking, was to set out what would be required in a future amendment to a zoning bylaw to permit a new cannabis use in the town. And the amendment set out a number of requirements, including an air quality study, a light mitigation plan, and a transportation impact study, and all of those would need to be completed before a new cannabis producer was allowed to set up shop. And then the official plan amendment lastly indicated that only the indoor cannabis uses that have satisfied the requirements of the official plan amendment would be recognized in the implementing zoning bylaw. And I should note that none of the existing producers were recognized. There is a bit of a story on one of them, but it doesn't really matter anymore, and I'll come back to that if required. I will note as well that the official plan amendment did not deal directly with the outdoor cultivation of cannabis. As I mentioned earlier, that is an agricultural use, and that was left to the implementing zoning bylaw, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And as I indicated, the official plan amendment was approved without modification by the Ontario Land Tribunal. Next slide. So that was the official plan amendment, and that sounds like a lot of information. It is, and I understand that and appreciate it, and we're happy to answer any questions about that when the time comes. The zoning bylaw. So there were two instruments at the Ontario Land Tribunal. The first was the official plan amendment I just discussed, and the second was the implementing zoning bylaw. And the purpose of the zoning bylaw was to establish two new zones that would permit indoor cannabis uses, and they were called the agricultural cannabis zone and the M2 or employment or industrial 2 cannabis zone. Both of these zones were not applied to any property in the town. The zoning bylaw also included definitions for a number of uses that are related to cannabis, cannabis-related indoor, cannabis-related outdoor, industrial hemp-related uses indoor, industrial hemp-related uses outdoor, and sensitive land uses. And we needed to establish those definitions and incorporate them in the zoning bylaw to ensure that we could regulate them accordingly. We also included a parking standard within the bylaw as well for future uses, and we also established a 300-meter setback for permitted as-of-right outdoor cultivation uses from sensitive land uses. Next slide. We also developed a number of zone standards for new cannabis uses, keeping in mind this is forward-thinking or sort of forward-looking and would be applied when someone made an application to establish a cannabis use. So we came up with a number of requirements that are on this slide. So for example, we set out lot frontage requirements of between 100 and 200 meters, a lot area minimum of 3 hectares for the smaller cannabis uses and 10 hectares or 25 acres for larger ones, maximum lot coverage of about 30%, and we also established a number of front yards, side yards, and rear yards that in the end were intended to work with a development that would be on a 10-hectare lot. We also included a prohibition on the accessory retail sales of cannabis from any cannabis facility in the town. And then we also established site-specific provisions for the Foss Road facility as well, but those site-specific provisions are not proposed in the bylaw that is before you this evening. Next slide. So the parent zoning bylaw, so how zoning bylaws work, the amendment that we presented or I presented to the Ontario Land Tribunal was an amendment to the town's comprehensive zoning bylaw that applies to all properties in the town except for those that are subject to the Niagara Escarpment Plan. That parent zoning bylaw was repealed by Council on August 30th of 2022 and replaced by a new zoning bylaw. And when that happens, all amendments to that previous bylaw, including the one I presented to the Ontario Land Tribunal also were repealed as well. So it just disappeared. The new zoning bylaw did not include provisions that dealt with cannabis, and it is now proposed through this process to correct that issue and ensure that there are and will be cannabis provisions in the zoning bylaw, and that's why this zoning bylaw has been prepared. And then all of the provisions initially approved by the Ontario Land Tribunal have been carried forward into the new zoning bylaw as is. So it includes all of the definitions I talked about. It includes all of the standards I talked about. What it does do a little differently is it establishes 3 cannabis zones, which I would stress again are not applied to any property in the town by the bylaw, but the 3 zones are intended to reflect their location in the agricultural designation, the specialty agricultural designation, and the rural employment designation. So essentially the idea is that if somebody new wanted to come to the town to establish a facility, they wouldn't be permitted to do it anywhere in the town, and they would have to go through the process mandated by the official plan amendment. And depending on where they were, they would then fall into one of those 3 zone categories and then be permitted, provided they met all of the tests set out in the official plan amendment. So that's really the only change between the bylaw that I recommended and the one that is proposed for consideration today. So that's my presentation. I know that's lots of information, and I know there are a number of speakers that want to speak, and I'm available to answer any questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. So moving now to our public participation, we do have 3 registered speakers, so they'll be given priority. They'll speak, and then we'll open it up to the public at large. I do have some kind of guidelines and rules that we'd like everybody to adhere to. First is proper decorum, so if we can all remain respectful and cognizant of the fact that we're here working together on a problem that the municipality faces. Second is when you come forward to use the microphone, please hit the bar to make sure the red light comes on like this. Otherwise, it's not going to be picked up by our YouTube channel, and for posterity, we won't have any audio if you're not using that. I will watch for that and hopefully remind people, but it is important if you want your records or your comments to be part of the public record and kept through our video process. We are asking that people keep their participation comments to 10 minutes. I will give you a warning at 9 minutes. I think there are a number of people that want to speak here this evening. We want to make sure everyone has that opportunity. I would also suggest that if you've heard all your concerns identified, then if you want to come and echo that those are the same concerns, but not rehash all the same issues if they've already been identified, that would be great. It would save time for people that maybe have other issues that they want to identify. Finally, I think if you could please provide your name and the municipality of your residence when you approach the microphone. Again, that's important for us to maintain that as part of the public record and the public meeting process. So I'm going to first call on our first registered speaker, and that's Mr. Tim Nohara, and I believe he's in the audience tonight. He had talked about participating via Zoom. I see him coming from the back, so welcome, Mr. Nohara.
Spacebar on the microphone. Good evening, panel, and Mr. McDonald, pleasure to see you again. To the crew that's here, the Cannabis Control Committee worked very, very closely with Mr. McDonald in preparing the cannabis and zoning bylaw amendments that went before the OLT successfully, and were both approved, I'm hearing from your comments, at the OLT successfully on August the 23rd of 2022. I do want to thank, I don't know who prepared what, but clearly there's involvement here in Mr. McDonald, but Lindsay Richardson and I'm guessing Ms. Sturton had some effort in the preparation of the materials that were published for this meeting. I thank you for the redlined comprehensive zoning bylaw amendment and the concordance that were provided. They made review very straightforward, or at least as straightforward as one could have them. Thank you. I would ask, as I expect there may be some changes to those, there may be some changes to the amendment that comes before council from the one that was published for this meeting. I would ask, if possible, if there are any changes to that zoning bylaw amendment, maybe you could provide, certainly I would appreciate receiving, maybe the public would appreciate receiving a track changed version of whatever comes before council as a zoning bylaw amendment, just track changed against the version that's published here, that was published for this meeting. If that's possible, I'd appreciate that. I think some residents would as well. I would also ask, on the same basis with the comprehensive zoning bylaw amendment itself that was redlined, if there are any changes to that, could you provide a create a clean copy of the proposed redlined Town of Pelham Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw Amendment, and just highlight any track changes from what was presented tonight for this meeting? That would be helpful. It would make review of those documents before the amendment comes to council easier. If we've reviewed the documents for this meeting, then we're just looking for highlights on the next one. And I think that would help the public tremendously. Certainly it would help me. I do have a couple of minor tweaks. I assume I can email those to Lindsay, or that would be fine. Very minor. So that is, I was hoping to be last, but thank you for inviting me first. So those are my comments with respect to the public materials that were presented before this meeting. Mr. McDonald's materials are new. Can we get a copy of your presentation? I assume that's public. That would be terrific. I missed, Mr. Tiggert, just the opening remarks by a few minutes. And when I walked in, there was a mention of an OLT decision. Did your comments in any way relate to the final decision? I missed those. No? Thank you, sir. My last question, I think, may be directed to anybody. When do we anticipate the zoning bylaw, this zoning bylaw amendment coming to council?
I can probably address that. So the hope is, based on public consultation and staff being able to gather all that information, digest it, and put a report together to council, that it would be in front of them on July 10th.
July the 10th. Appreciate that. Thank you. Could I ask right here, and I'll follow up, that I could be a delegate at the whatever council meeting, if it's the July 10th?
Yeah, we have a delegation process. You just have to go through that online. And
I will I'll do so. Without getting into details, Mr. Tiggert, you're aware that there was a process like that at a previous meeting recently, and unfortunately, the information that was posted for the date of the meeting was incorrect, and so it actually bypassed the opportunity. So I just don't want something like that to happen again for this one. So I'll gladly send you a communication this evening for that. If it shows up for July 10th, then I'd appreciate just the follow-up, just in case if the date appears differently. Thank you. I do have maybe one question for Mr. McDonald, just off the top of your presentation, sir. If a zoning bylaw amendment I'm speaking in general terms. We can relate it to this particular instance, but I'm actually asking a general question. If a zoning bylaw amendment was appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal, and the town was dealing with that appeal at the Ontario Land Tribunal, and it was taking some time, and during the time frame that the zoning bylaw amendment was before the Ontario Land Tribunal, before a final decision was released on that, the town decided to develop a new comprehensive zoning bylaw. So we have an appeal, a zoning bylaw amendment before the Ontario Land Tribunal. The town needs to update its comprehensive zoning. It needs to update its zoning bylaw, so it goes through a public process and it updates its zoning bylaw. It creates a new zoning bylaw. Is it possible to do that? Is it possible for a town to create a new zoning bylaw while a zoning bylaw amendment is before the Ontario Land Tribunal under an old bylaw, and maintain both? In other words, once the new zoning bylaw is in place, once the OLT decision with respect to a zoning bylaw before it is received, then that approved OLT zoning bylaw could be brought into a new zoning bylaw. Is that possible for a municipality? And I may maybe ask the question in another way. If a municipality has a zoning bylaw amendment before the OLT, is the municipality essentially prohibited from moving forward on a comprehensive new zoning bylaw?
So I'm going to interject as the facilitator tonight. I think we're straying a little bit from the course of tonight's meeting, and I think the detailed question that you're asking is probably not fair for Mr. McDonald to try and answer off the cuff. But if you want to forward that to the town, we will look at that, and once we clearly know what the question is, we can provide you a comprehensive and detailed answer.
Thank you, Mr. Tiggart.
Thank you.
That's it for my questions.
Thanks. We'll move to the next scheduled delegation, and I would ask Mr. Bill Heska to come forward as he has been registered.
Bill Heska. I'm a resident of Pelham. I was a member of the Cannabis Control Committee for the last, from 2019 to 2022, along with Tim Noera was our chair, which was he spent hours and we spent hours reviewing this issue. And I really worked in industry for 40 years and never was I confronted with such a challenging and long process with lack of clear direction. I want to just give a little bit of history because there's a lot of new people here I don't think that have ever attended a meeting on this issue. Is that this committee was chaired by Tim. We were appointed by the town in 2019. We started meeting the town staff in several months of meetings. The CCC realized that town staff had limited knowledge of the industry, and we recommended to the town council that the town hire outside consultants for legal and planning experience in cannabis. As a result, Eric Burles and Meridian Planning Consultants, Nick McDonald, who we worked with very, very closely, were hired. The challenge of the town was left. The town was pioneering bylaws for a new industry in our municipality in Ontario and in Canada and even beyond, because the CCC has had communication even with American persons. Our first efforts were to establish zoning and planning amendments for the industry. After many meetings and iterations, the council finally approved on July 2020. An odorous industry nuisance bylaw 42/2020 was developed with the assistance of the PPPG, Management Odor Consultant. The town council approved in March 2020 and was amended, and it was amended in 4263 and approved in July 27th, 2020. The site control bylaw was approved in July 2020 also. The appeal of this is where we got into this process and got into the legal hassles or challenges, which were really slowed everything right down because of a lack of clear cooperation from the growers and everything. The appeal of the OPA and the ZBA by the cannabis growers led to the OLTL hearing January 24th, 26th, 2022. Only ReadyCam participated, and on July 25th was the final part of that hearing. As a result of this action, the CCC was not able to act and had to wait the ruling, which the OLT made on the 23rd of August 2022. The CCC presented a detailed closing memo to Council dated the 9th of August 2022, which provided details of the status of the progress, which is provide information to the new council to be elected in October 2022. So basically, the election that our new council was elected at, the CCC basically our term was expired, and we didn't do anything after August. After several months of no council activity on the cannabis issue, this is a new council, nothing was happening. We never heard nothing. It was out of the media. Council never even talked about it. I don't think the new councillors knew about it, some of them. I know some of the old one did, and they had some discussion. The CC found that the issue had not been communicated by town staff to the new council. In fact, the issue was not even considered in the new council's strategic plan. That was developed in early 2023. The town staff was asked to follow up, and ReadyCam declined to provide documentation for the minutes of settlement by June 17, 2024. Just recently, at the council meeting on May 29th, 2024, the CAO, David Cribbs, submitted a report to council on the cannabis zoning bylaw amendment 2024-0133. The town staff had told CCC that the zoning and official plan amendments would be combined with the old bylaws, no issues. It was a total shock to the former CC, and we were not briefed on communication that led to the report. It's not that there was some communication after August of 2022 to 23. There was some communication behind the scenes, but then for this report, nothing. It was completely cut off. There was a total lack of transparency, and it appears that the town staff misinformed or failed to identify the issue before council approved the amendments in July 2020. There was a lot of discussion when the amendments were being drafted. There was no clear highlighting of changes and the dates on amendments. What we're seeing is you talk about some amendments. I bet you we had I don't know, 20 plus different bylaws come through to us, and every time we saw them, it was buried, and we didn't even have dates on them. It was a nightmare. Staff didn't know they didn't even know if they had the latest one, some cases. I'm just making this a point because there was a lot of effort, and it was frustrating because we could not track the changes. And I appreciated what Lindsay had just pulled together in this latest version. It's clear, and it's what we had asked for from day one, but did not get. On June 6th, 2024, Lindsay Richardson did supply the zoning bylaw amendments, read cannabis for council to review, and changes and additions in red and with a concordance. Amazing. It can be done. What versions were actually circulated to the outside consultants for review? The town staff was given advice, and as a result, they dropped the OLT final action. The citizens of Pelham have been waiting for more than 6 years for action since 2018 on the cannabis issue and have seen no action. The council needs to direct staff to make necessary changes to get positive action on the cannabis issue in Pelham. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huska. So we'll now move to our third registered delegate tonight, and that's Mr. Bernie Law, if you're in the room.
Good evening. To the mayor, elected officials, residents of Fonthill, and the head table, thank you very much for this opportunity. We have a very serious problem here in Pelham regarding the growth of cannabis. The Cannabis Production Company has created two very offensive measures in our town. The Law family have lived in Pelham since 1926, and we wish to support the growth of Fonthill going forward to reside in a clean environment. That's 2 years short of 100. These companies took advantage of our agricultural bylaws for growing vegetables and started growing cannabis in our local greenhouses. The residents of Pelham have to live with the excessive evening light and odor coming from the cannabis growing facilities for years. We are here today to ask our elected officials to enact the powers to stop the cannabis production companies from operating in Pelham. Respectfully submitted, Bernie Law, Fonthill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Law. So those were the three individuals that had registered, but we'll now open the podium up to any member of the public. And I would just remind you again, there is a 10-minute time limit. I'll remind you at 9 minutes. If you could just state your name and the municipality of your residence for our public record, that would be appreciated. I see the microphones left on there. So any public presentations, please come forward.
Hello, my name's Jason Cox, and I live right next to Wellington Heights Public School. And one of the happiest days, I've been here 7 years, was when CanTrust went belly up and closed. Because after that day, my kids and all the kids in the schoolyard didn't have to smell this garbage coming out of that plant. And when you're there and you're trying to open up your windows in your door and smell the fresh air, and you got this garbage coming into your house, you have people in my family have health effects. I had to go out and buy an air purification system for my home. And I'm telling you, that school had to keep kids inside some days because the stench coming out of that plant was so atrocious. This is where I want my tax money to fight. When I got my tax bill and you got this nice pie chart and it shows where all the money's going, this is what I want to see to fight when I pay my taxes in the city of Pelham, the town of Pelham. I moved here 7-8 years ago from the country. I'm proud to be in an agricultural, small, rural town, and this is what I want to fight for. Make those terms and conditions for a permit 10 times harder than you got. This is the fight that we need to fight, and you're elected to fight it for us. So let's just get it done. I'm not big on, I've always worked in the private sector, and a lot of these kind of things, there's a lot of shady stuff in the back. I want to make sure all this stuff is up front and everybody knows where the problems are, and we're going to put the money behind it and the tax money behind it to fight this thing and get it out of Pelham. Thank you.
Anyone else?
My name
Just have a
is
seat at the front, sir. You can wait.
my name is Tilly Clapp, and I live in Pelham. I also received my tax bill, and it's upwards of $8,000 now. And way back when this all started, and I think we had a meeting in this room, the former planning head was not really willing to go beyond what the rules already were in terms of distance from a facility to another person. And I just want to say to the staff that, yes, we don't want to break rules and get into trouble. But I think that we need, especially with a new industry like cannabis, we need you to be advocating for us. I don't live near CanTrust and I don't live near Foss, but except for when cannabis shut their doors, there isn't a time I drive by and not smell a horrible smell where people's home values have dropped and people are not able to go outside. And I know today is not about odor, but it's the whole big picture is that I don't have much confidence in whatever we have written down. And I feel badly for the Cannabis Control Committee who worked their tails off and saw a deadline pass recently where Redican was supposed to submit some documents. And I have a sense that they are just thumbing their nose at us. And I was told that the town has figured out a different method and the lawyer believes that this is a better method. But we had that in writing, that they were supposed to submit documents. Now, I have grandchildren, and if they do something and I say you're not supposed to do that, and they do it anyway, and there's no consequence, that sends a strong message. And so I have that as my number one concern. Number two, anyone in Pelham who lives near agricultural land and who isn't here should be, because everyone is at risk. And the worst part of it is, given the fact that indoor cannabis is inside a building and does not need to be on prime tender fruit land, there is still going to be a route to apply to build on specialized, I think, is that the word, specialized agricultural zones. They're not making any more land that grows peaches, plums, and all of those delicate fruits. And I think to even begin to allow a process where you can apply is wrong. And if you're going to tell me, well, that's what the rules are in Ontario, then I would say to you, you are staff who are working for us, but you also should be advocating for us and using your network of professionals to push on this. This is really reminiscent of shutting down a science center that is an architectural marvel, of putting a private spa on park land in a city that does not have enough. And I think that this is kind of the old paved paradise, put up a parking lot. Once there's a building on a peach farm, I don't see it going the other way. So I also want to say that I am disappointed that in 2 years nothing much has happened, and I don't know why. I don't know what the former planning director's leave taking was all about, but it does make people wonder. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I ask the next resident to come forward with their concerns, I just wanted to clarify a couple things, just so the room understands that the zoning bylaw amendment that's before council exactly mirrors the work that was done by the Cannabis Control Committee that was adopted previously and now being incorporated in our updating zoning bylaw. So that work is being carried forward as approved by the Cannabis Control Committee and the previous council. Secondly, I can't get into too many details, but the town continues to work with Redican on those things negotiated before the OLT, and we're hoping that those negotiations continue and are in a positive light for the town. So having said that, I'll open up the mic again to anyone else that wants to provide input or comment for council prior to them making a decision on this zoning bylaw amendment that's before them. And again, just your name and your residence.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Larry Stogren. I live on Canberra Road in Fenwick. Within a kilometer, the way the crow flies, to CanTrust. 37 years we've been there, and the property actually has become unusable the way it was with CanTrust operating. I've developed a severe allergy to that odor, and I can't live there anymore. I can't go outside. I have to have filtration because my nose runs constantly. I also want to ask if any research has been done on the effluent of when the incoming air is taken in to the greenhouses, the effluent that goes out. There was some talk a long time ago, I believe, about trying to find out what is in that. The air coming in and the air coming out. And the reason I ask that is, like I said, 37 years I've been at that property. I've never had, in our entire time there, moss growing on the north side of my siding. Now, I don't know if anybody else has this. I keep my property good. There's enough sunshine there, so I'm not totally like in a bush or anything there. But after CanTrust started operating, it slowly started to develop. So I'm not saying for sure it is caused by that, but I'm just wondering if any actual research has been done on what is coming out of the greenhouse after it's brought in. So I believe that the Cannabis Control Committee did a very good job. I don't think the work is done yet. And I believe that these type of industries, yes, they may be classified agricultural, but there has to be some common sense applied to the situations that they create by the light and by the odor. I can tell you that I have property in Leamington, Ontario. It is a very big greenhouse community there, as you probably all know. And there, I am quite a ways away from greenhouses. But the sky is like you're on LSD or something. It's really weird. And one day, I came out and I thought, I got a skunk underneath the house or underneath the porch. It wasn't that. It was the odor of coming from the greenhouses. Now, they do have, or they are trying to apply their limitation to any more development. They're having meetings there, I don't know if you know or not, but they are having meetings on trying to stop any more greenhouse development. Because it's all big companies that have come in there and bought up the land. And a fellow I know there had several hundred acres of property. He sold some for $35 an acre, and he had some more that the company wanted, and they went up from $35 an acre to $85 an acre. He didn't need the money, so he didn't want to sell it. But this is how they are buying up all the land there, because, you know, you get $5,000 an acre maybe around here, you get that kind of money down there, well, that's what fed the development. And I know that the residents there are up in arms of the light pollution. I've seen it, I've experienced it myself, and the smell. However, I can say one thing, that the smell there in Leamington smells like rotting things. It doesn't exactly smell like it does down here, and I'm not affected by that at all. But over here, I get a little whiff of that, and my nose is running for a long time. So my question is the health aspect, and if any research has been done on what's coming out of the greenhouse. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. So not to discount your questions or your concerns, they're beyond the scope of the bylaw that we have before council now. All I can provide to you is that cannabis is a federally regulated activity in this country, and they set the standards at the federal level for all things related to those types of concerns. So again, our bylaw is not dealing with, you know, the odor issues, the lighting issues tonight. Those all are concerns that council has heard, and that's all information that the Cannabis Control Committee had to them when they were doing their work, and we're not suggesting anything other than what was previously done by the Cannabis Control Committee. So I have that. Now, if there's anyone else, please come forward. And there's some seats at the front if you just want to queue up here, that's fine too.
Where do I press the button? It's going. Dave McFarland from Foss Road. I'll start by a question. When I went to council, when there was a notice on 82 Foss Road for a building, and I went to the town hall and I asked what was going to be built, and they wouldn't answer. So I said, is there a building permit? No. The federal government, I was told the federal government would issue the building permit. That's bullshit. The municipality has to issue the building permit. So there was a building permit issued on August 31st, 2016 for the building on Foss Road by Redecan, and there were inspections called for. I want to know if those inspections were carried out. Footing inspection, it was marked, yes, it was supposed to be carried out. Was it? Ready for backfill, was that inspection carried out? Not likely. Framing, was that carried out? Not likely. Was the final inspection by the city or town carried out? Not likely. The other thing that usually is carried out is a fire inspection. The man standing over there should answer that. Was that carried before the building was occupied?
Sir, I'm not going to put the fire chief in that position, so...
Why? He's standing there. He can answer.
It's not the purpose of tonight's public
I don't
meeting.
care if it's the purpose. I want an answer.
Well, you can make a Freedom of Information request.
I did that, and I got nothing. Thank you very much for the town. And I see you're not dealing with odor issues. Who's going to deal with them? Federal government? And I don't think so. You know why? The Public Relations Officer for Health Canada states that all buildings or part of buildings where cannabis is produced, packaged, labeled, and stored need to be equipped with a system that filters air to prevent the escape of odors. What's the definition of prevent? Stop. That means no odors. Your bylaws are full of shit because they don't, well, too bad. That's the way it's coming to you.
Well, we may have to cut you off because proper decorum.
No, don't worry about it.
You can express your concerns.
There are no odors
but please remain
coming
civil.
off that property. I'd like to know too, the town doesn't plan to do anything about odors then. Is that right?
No, that's not right. So we have a noxious odor bylaw, and there's a notice of motion coming before council, probably before the end of summer, to review that and revisit the levels that are established in that bylaw, which are consistent with industry standards. But council
No, they are not. No, they are not.
Council has put that to review.
Well, I'd like to see them review it instead of just a lot of bullshit. As well, for new buildings, are you requiring drawings, specs?
Building permits are covered under the Ontario Building Code, and we have a very competent building department staff that follow the code and the requirements.
No, they don't. No, they don't. Because at the initial meeting that was held here, the person that held your position said there were no drawings and no specs for Redecan. No drawings, no specs. That individual didn't have to do anything to review or have anything to review because he didn't have any fire specs or drawings. Nothing. Has the fire department ever been on that property? No, I'm not. No, we're not. That's a concern of these people. Yeah.
Tonight's meeting. So
Answer the question.
no, I'm not going to make the chief get into a debate with you because I don't want to get into a
Because
debate
it's
with
bullshit. That's why you don't do your job.
you. Well, I would disagree.
Well, I don't. Thank you
And-
very much for your non-cooperation.
Hi, my name is Wendy Brule, and I've been sitting back there thinking I'm not going to say anything, but this just prompted me to come forward. We don't live in Pelham, we live in Welland, and we are about 600 meters from Redecan, directly east. We are greatly affected. I know we're not talking about odor, but I've just heard you say that the town of Pelham is coming up with a bylaw to manage the odor problem and using the standards that are recognized. I have a problem with that because I had a bylaw officer, excuse me, I'm nervous, a bylaw officer show up my house and tell me that the measurements that he is doing are within the standards. Meanwhile, I cannot sit outside of my property with that odor. It is very obnoxious. I have people coming to my front yard to come to visit, and they will say, "What is that? That is disgusting. How can you live here?" So I really, really hope that you take those things into account, because right now, if you say you're passing a bylaw with the current standards, I feel like it's not going to be an appropriate measure to help control and to satisfy the residents. I really hope you do listen. Please listen. I'm not a Pelham resident, but we are greatly affected. Please and thank you. Because, you know, when bylaw officers show up at your house and harass you because you're submitting the only way you can report the odor, I don't feel that that's appropriate. I think the council really needs to hear the town of Pelham and the Welland residents and their concerns about this. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And I think council has heard those concerns, and that's why they are asking staff to bring that forward as a motion to consider looking at our noxious odor bylaw and looking at the standards. Well, that'll be all part of the process. But I think council has heard the concerns from the public loud and clear and repeatedly. Well, that's not fair, but again, not the purpose of tonight's meeting. Well, so I would ask anyone that wants to provide input to the bylaw that's currently before council, the zoning bylaw amendment, to please come forward and provide comments on that bylaw.
Hey guys, how you doing? Ben Cushney. I live at 1379 Belfour. So I'm about 50 feet from the entrance of CanTrust. Again, sorry. It's on, yeah? I just wanted to echo what everybody else was saying. We don't need to rehash this. I know this isn't the purpose, but I just wanted to echo what the other residents were saying. And then the second thing, obviously the new zoning bylaw amendment doesn't affect any existing buildings, correct?
That's correct. There's terminology that's called grandfathering. So
Yeah.
they have permissions under the laws of Ontario that if they predate the zoning bylaws, then they have the inherent rights to operate as they were.
Okay, so when council reviews your odor bylaw, then we'll address all the items that we're discussing now, essentially?
Well, the odor bylaw.
The odor
will-
and light,
the-
essentially?
The odor bylaw will address,
Okay, and that was August, you said?
probably before August.
Okay. And how do we have input on that? You have another meeting?
You're welcome to attend a council meeting as a delegation to make your thoughts known, and there is a process on the town's website. There's a form that needs to be filled out. We do cap the number of delegations at any council meeting to 4, and I'm not sure what the status is for the July 10th meeting. There's only one meeting in July.
Okay,
So likely the notice of motion will be before council in August, and there's one meeting in August. But you're welcome to contact the clerk's office and request delegation status through our online application process.
okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Hi. My name is Dave Schlott. I am a resident at 999 Haste Street, which, as the crow flies, is about 500 meters southwest of Redecan. With the prevailing winds typically going southwest, nearly on a daily basis, we are greatly impacted by the odor. We're fairly new to the town, and I'm just trying to get up to speed with this very complex issue. I've been following along the letters to the editor that Mr. Nohara has sent over the last couple months. Starting on April 30th, he sent a letter to the editor basically asking council that there was a deadline coming forward on May 30th for Redecan to provide some odor control documentation to the Cannabis Control Committee. At least that was my understanding. It sounds like they did not do that. And then in a follow-up letter, I believe it was Mr. Nohara again, was urging council to use some tools they had regarding the zoning bylaw amendment, whereby on June 17th, they would have maybe had an opportunity through the Land Tribunal to block the approval of the expansion of the office and warehouse by Redecan. And that didn't happen either. And I think in the article it said that the town was advised that there was some legal advice to pursue a different path. Without getting too deep into the weeds, again, I'm just learning about this, the history, but it is something that's very important to me and my family, and we're impacted on a daily basis. I'm trying to understand, I know that the zoning bylaw amendment is not retroactive, and that perhaps any new odor committee recommendations could help in the future. It just seems to me like council did have some leverage with Redecan and maybe have chosen a different path, but it's not clear to me or maybe the residents of the town how we're planning to use whatever leverage we have with Redecan to help them control the odor. It would seem unreasonable to me that we would allow Redecan not only to continue to operate, which it sounds like we can't prevent that, but to expand without installing some odor mitigation devices. Again, I could have my information a little bit wrong, but this is kind of what I've been reading, so I'd appreciate any comments.
Sure, and I'm going to ask Mr. McDonald to just speak to that a little bit.
Yes, thank you. And I did mention it in the PowerPoint presentation, but both Redecan and CanTrust were established before the town passed the initial interim control bylaw and before the town passed a bylaw that restricted that kind of land use. Just as a complete aside, the town of Pelham was not the only municipality in Ontario to be kind of caught in the situation it was in 2018, because when the Government of Canada legalized cannabis, all the cannabis producers rushed in, they bought up greenhouses, and they developed them everywhere because they were agricultural uses and they were legally permitted to operate. So what the town did through the bylaw process is say, we don't want any more to develop in the town, and that's what this bylaw does. However, as you've already heard, whatever existed before is legally allowed to exist. And there's a term us planners use and lawyers use as well. Both Redecan and CanTrust would be considered legal non-conforming uses, meaning that if they want to expand, they cannot expand as of right unless they obtain some kind of permission either from the Committee of Adjustment or from Council to expand. So this bylaw does not include a component that permits Redecan to expand its warehouse. It doesn't include a component that allows them to build an office that they wanted to. It doesn't do any of those things. So that's off the table in this bylaw. I'm not sure what other conversations are going on, but the bylaw presented tonight certainly doesn't propose to carry forward that permission.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. I would just urge council to do whatever is possible to try to get Redecan to install some odor mitigation devices, whether they're obligated to or not. I don't know how they do that, but I would just urge them to do that because it is definitely a significant issue in the area that we're living in. Thank you.
Panel, thank you so much for allowing us to come up and present some questions and some concerns too. I have total appreciation for Mr. McDonald's presentation. There are, the process is on the table for amendments. Oh, by the way, I'm Darlene McDowell, and I'm at 77 Cherry Ridge Boulevard in Fenwick. And the CanTrust FINA operation is basically in my backyard. I appreciate the fact that your presentation and the whole evening is dedicated to these zoning bylaw amendments. In my estimation, it's not helping us right now. So everything that's happened up to this point is something that we're just going to have to continue to tolerate. That's what I'm hearing you say. And I don't find that that's acceptable. The expansion comment that you made, that Redecan will not be able to expand, I have made application to Freedom of Information, and I have information that the building permits for CanTrust FINA, even though FINA, CanTrust are bankrupt. The company that has bought that property is a big group from British Columbia, and they have every intention, according to all the literature that we're getting from Ernst & Young, to set up shop and start producing cannabis very quickly. Our town staff, in reviewing the information that we have through the Freedom of Information Act, clearly stated that, hey, you haven't paid for your building permits 2023 and for 2024, but you know what? If you let us on your property to look at what you've started to build, we'll forego a whole year of building permit charges. So that being said, this new company that's going to be setting up shop now has valid building permits for a 400,000 square foot addition and 5 other buildings. I don't know how that is protecting the residents of Fenwick and area, that we have town staff chasing down bankrupt companies who just want to set up shop here from British Columbia and produce cannabis in my backyard. I'm taking this quite personally. When our staff is going after them and not protecting us, they're protecting big cannabis. I don't know what more we can do. We have put this forward to town council, to the mayor, to Mr. Cripps, to everybody would listen to us, that this building permit that has been approved is illegal because they applied for the building permit in 2019. I reviewed the laws of Ontario. Building permits, if there's been no sign of building, they should actually be expired or absolutely not renewed. I'm asking town council, seriously, I know this meeting is about the all the building zone amendments, et cetera. Again, that's not helping us. You've given us a forum to ask questions. I'm taking the liberty to ask questions to let everybody else in this room know what I found out through freedom of information is they are going to build big. And if we think the smells coming from Redecan is awful, we'll just wait until we've got 400,000 more square feet of production facility going in our backyard, in an area where there's high-priced homes. The town, I believe, should be focusing on us, protecting our properties, protecting the value of our property, protecting the right that we have to enjoy our backyard and to enjoy living with our neighbors, enjoying the property that we purchased. My husband and I bought in 2012. There was flowers growing in that greenhouse. There was no word that that was going to be a cannabis facility. I wouldn't have bought. I would not have even considered Pelham as my home. I know a lot of people, when we've canvassed door to door, that are getting fed up and they said they'll move too. What does that do to the value of our properties where people want to leave? We need to be protected, and zoning bylaws, changes or not, I don't know what that's going to do with the current situation. But I can tell you right now, those building permits need to be revoked by this town council, by this mayor, which I'm disappointed that Mayor Junkin's not here tonight. He's here? Well, someone's got to start protecting us, and I'm calling on town council to do something. This building permit for this new facility, it's a new facility. If they're being allowed to go forward simply because they went through Ernst & Young, the bankruptcy protectors, and they're saying, you know what, it's FINA and CanTrust that's applying. FINA and CanTrust are bankrupt. They no longer exist. It's a new company. So I know I've gone on, and it's got nothing to do with the zoning bylaw amendments, but you've given me a mic, and you're hearing from me. And I'm right now asking, please do something to help us. I do not want to be subjected to the bright lights from CanTrust. I do not want to be subjected to the smells. I don't want to be subjected to the traffic. I don't know what's happening in the groundwater that comes out of that facility, but it's going to have to be addressed because it's going to be affecting our health. I've heard from other people. So if there's anything that I'm off base on here, I'd like to hear about it. But I think that with the information that I've been able to obtain, I think we've got a very valid complaint against this town staff, and town council needs to do something about it. Thank you.
Good afternoon or good evening. My name is Mike Hall. I'm a resident of Pelham. I just want to make sure, Mr. McDonald, the essence of our what's before us today is with regards to setbacks. Yes. Okay. So I think what's happened, unfortunately, with some of the good residents here is we're confusing some of our earlier discussions 5-6 years ago with what's before us today. So I just want to make sure I've got this correct. In your new proposal, setbacks are sitting at 80, 60 and 40 meters, depending on where they are, frontage, sides, back. Is that correct, sir?
Yeah, just to clarify, so there's two things happening in this bylaw. So firstly, the bylaw establishes zones that would permit a new cannabis use, the development of a new cannabis use on a property in that zone. Before it even gets permitted, they would have to do all of the studies to support what they want to do. And they would have to demonstrate that where they bought property and want to develop a facility is far enough away from all sensitive uses so that we don't run into this problem all over again. It is very likely, in my opinion, that it would be very difficult to find a property in Pelham which doesn't create a problem in the future based on the sizes of some of these facilities. So to even get the zoning requires a lot of work. Public meetings like these, which I'm sure a lot of folks will attend, and I'm sure council will then have to make a decision if that ever happens. The setbacks you're talking about only get applied after they've passed through all those hoops and have satisfied the town's tests about where they actually are located, and they've proven or demonstrated that they will not create any odor impacts on neighboring land uses. It's a really big hill to climb. So before they even get the setbacks applied, they have to get the zoning. And what this bylaw does is it makes it clear that somebody can't come in, build a greenhouse or buy an existing greenhouse and grow cannabis, because it would be illegal to do so in accordance with this bylaw. So that's what it does.
Okay, thank you for that. If I remember correctly, with recommendations from the CCC, the minimum setbacks that they were looking at were 300 meters, is that correct? Can I ask why we've now gone to a 60, 40, or 80, depending on frontage and sidage?
So going back, there's a lot of history about what the setbacks are. So you're correct. The minimum setbacks that were suggested were between 300 and up to 500, and in some cases 1,000 meters, depending on context. So what those numbers suggest to me is that anyone coming in wanting to take one of these zones that we've created and put it on their property would have to satisfy those kinds of setbacks to even be permitted. What the setbacks in this bylaw do is, once you've met all those tests and you've satisfied the odor issue, then here is the separation we want your building to be from lot lines, from a purely aesthetic and functional perspective. It has nothing to do with odor at that point.
I think my comment then would be to the group. I think it's important to recognize that we are all aware, as you've heard from the comments from the people here today, and going back 5-6 years, that odor is a huge issue. And I know that's not what's before us today. I know it's about this zoning amendment and specifically to setbacks, which is my great concern. I don't believe there's a cannabis company in this country yet that's ever produced a marijuana that doesn't smell, and when it comes through, it doesn't affect the people. I guess the concerns that I would echo for the residents here and myself are that 300 meters, for me, and speaking with the council initially, that's not even close to enough. We need 3,000 meters. Having said that, my concern here today, my concern here today, and I appreciate the research and the work that you've done. Having said that, my concern is when the community has come together over the past 5-6 years to the point that we have to have a cannabis control committee that outlasts one council and potentially a second council. We now sit before you, we're having the same issues brought up again. Why are we putting these setbacks so small? Why not start at 300? My understanding is Niagara-on-the-Lake setbacks start at 600 meters. Pelham is just down the road, figuratively speaking. Why are we going to 80, 60, and 40, minus what you talked about at the very beginning, they have to go through this rigorous process? Because I'm going to tell you, no disrespect, nobody's going to trust the process in this room. Nobody's going to trust it because there is a history here. So my question is, why are we reducing setbacks if the people down the street are going at 600 meters and we're going to sit at 80, 40, 60, depending? Is there an answer for that?
I guess I'll try again. So the setbacks you see in the bylaw are only applied after a producer has demonstrated that they are going to be set back far enough away from all sensitive land uses, which may be anywhere between 300 and 500 meters or more. So if a cannabis producer purchases a property, they have to make an application, and they have to support that application with the studies the town sets out in its official plan amendment. Right. And it has to identify an appropriate setback through that process. And in my opinion, that setback will be at least 300 meters to 500 meters based on experience, even more if it's a big facility. And if you look at all the properties in Pelham, and if you apply a 300 or a 500 meter setback on that property, there would be virtually well, very few properties that would actually be eligible for the construction of a new facility. So only if they did that would they get the zoning. And then the setback numbers in here have nothing to do with odor. They have everything to do with minimizing the impact of a warehouse-like building on the rural character. That's all it does.
Appreciate that. And that particular issue that we're talking about here with regards to the zoning bylaw, would this be applied then to the expansion of the former CanTrust, we'll call it Fowena, CanTrust, whatever it is, the new area that they want to develop in next to Cherry Ridge that's going to expand into Cherry Ridge? Would the new bylaw apply to that, or are they grandfathered in?
So it's a good question, and it may require a bit of research and thinking, but the new bylaw doesn't apply to their property because they're legal nonconforming, right? So they don't have the zoning that we're creating for new developments. This is a development that exists. So they've got a building permit, and I'm not getting into that because that's not my expertise.
I understand. Right? Yeah, no, I understand. Okay. So just want to make sure for the comments for the room that everybody understands that the former CanTrust site, Fowena or whoever's buying it now, the potential expansion that's going to happen into closer to Cherry Ridge would be grandfathered in under what they rolled into town with 5-6 years ago. Is that fair? Is that a fair assessment? Okay, so essentially for the people in the room, if they're questioning what it is I'm asking is basically when that company comes in and buys that property, they can basically expand as far as they like because there's nothing to stop them, and that this bylaw here will not affect that in any way. Is that correct?
No, and that's why council is revisiting the noxious odor bylaw to see that they have heard what the community is saying. They're saying that the odor is unacceptable, so council is looking to its toolbox to see what they can do, and they'll be reviewing that, and hopefully can, exert more control over that problem with a more stringent bylaw. Okay. And then, of course, that'll be tested in the courts.
Okay. And my last question, is there a reason why this meeting is happening tonight to expedite this process instead of allowing this to play out with the Land Tribunal?
I'm going to turn to Mr. McDonald on that again.
Yeah, so just to be clear, the bylaw that was approved by the Ontario Land Tribunal ended up being repealed by the town, I would say inadvertently, and doesn't exist anymore. The official plan amendment still exists, and it makes it very clear that no new cannabis use can come in without getting a rezoning. So the town was still protected and is still protected. But to make sure that we implement the official plan amendment that says you can't do cannabis, we need to do this bylaw to work hand in glove with that document and reintroduce and reinsert the policies that were approved by the tribunal some time ago.
Was there a hearing scheduled, though, initially? Was there a hearing scheduled for this proposal to go to the Land Tribunal, or no? No?
No, there's no proposal for this bylaw being discussed tonight to go to the tribunal. The only way it'll get there is after it is passed by council. If it's appealed by anyone who is not happy with it, then it goes back to the tribunal.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions?
Not so much a question, but a comment. I think that folks here feel that the reason that you have this turnout was not necessarily just the amendment, but it's because people feel that nothing has happened with respect to the odor issues. And I think people would not care if it was 300 meters or 500 or 1,000, if it was a pretty looking greenhouse and there was no smell. Because I personally wouldn't care if one moved next to me if it didn't smell. And I have read about places in the States that have the technology because the greenhouses were built purposely for cannabis, because cannabis is not like other agricultural uses. It stinks when it's growing at certain stages. And these people kind of swooped in, took greenhouses that were meant for tomato plants and then kind of stuffed in some technology, but it's not the best technology. I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to have another meeting like this, just about order, and have people like Mr. McDonald and maybe an expert and someone from the Cannabis Control Committee to answer our questions, because I think fear breeds anger, and you're feeling some of that anger tonight. And I think there should be a meeting like this to clear the air before the council meeting.
So thank you. I think all council members are in attendance tonight. I'm sure they've heard that message. They have heard these concerns, and they are working to their utmost to try and address them. And often systems don't go as we would like, but I think they've heard that, staff have heard that, and it probably would be a different group of experts that we would convene to talk about nuisance odor bylaw, but I think that's not a bad suggestion, and we will take that back to council for their consideration. Any other comments tonight on the zoning bylaw that we have before council?
Hélène Gagnon from Cherry Ridge. Just have a few questions about what is federal versus what is the responsibility of the town. So it's like one of those. There's certain paragraph in this, the Government of Canada Cannabis Odor and Control, that, you know, it said it's the federal responsibility or it's the municipal responsibility. So anyway, I won't talk to the odor anymore. I got a document here that I had on one of the previous meetings from June 2022, which was talking about the zoning bylaw amendments. And I read, the planning department is responsible for processing new cannabis facility application. Require applicant study will be peer reviewed by the town expert and share with the public. Public meetings inform residents and stakeholders and provide venue to hear concerns. Council must approve a zoning bylaw amendment for an application to proceed. And I read in one of the documents after CanTrust went bankrupt that if somebody new was going to apply, they would have to go through the process. So I didn't see that happening. We find out by chance that there were new owners. And when we question, everybody we question, the councillor, the mayor, there was no transparency. We just find out, again, through Freedom of Information or other document, that the new owners were there. We were told that the sale was still not registered with the town. Well, they're hiring people. There's car there. They're cutting the grass. So if I don't own a house, yes, if there's no closing on my house, I'm not going to hire an electrician and a plumber and a landscaper. So we wonder how come they said that the sale have not been registered, and how come building permit, like Darlene mentioned, were emitted to a company, to Elmcliff and FINA, that were bankrupt. The building permit were not issued to the new company, but to the company that were bankrupt, and then passed on, I guess, to the new owners. So there's a big lack of transparency that we all try to understand, and we don't. And the other question that Mr. Noiro asked, and that I questioned also, was the interim. You know, you said you were going to look at that separately, but that's our big problem right now. We want to know why on before June 17 was there's not a notice issued to the OLT by the town, because they were at the finish line. They did all that work, all those hours, volunteer hours, and they were at the finish line. All they have to do is press the button, tell a lawyer to sign paper, and get the notice done. So why are we here doing amendments, which maybe I miss Mr. McDonald's explanation at the beginning. I'm French, I don't always take too long to process, but why, if everything was already there, do we have to reinvent the wheel now? So want to see like the difference with what was there. Could we not have just sent a notice and then add more to it instead of, you know, now there's no interim and we're really concerned about that. We're concerned about the new owner coming in, when they're going to start production, and specifically about the extra 400,000 square meter more. So it's not just the odor. The light is a big thing. You know, when you wake up during the night and you don't have to turn on the light to go in your fridge, it's a big issue. And there's other issue that going to need to be discussed if you say in another meeting, or whether it's the water, whether it's the traffic, whether it's the sewage, the water pressure, or whatever it is. There's a lot of other issues that are going to need to be discussed, I believe. And just another question also about hemp versus cannabis. How is hemp versus cannabis going to be treated? Because in the federal document, they say the federal don't look about the hemp, just the cannabis. So at the Kentras, there was already some irregularity that happened. How do you differentiate sometimes hemp than cannabis? It's, okay, row 5 is hemp and row 6 is cannabis, or whatever it's going to be. I don't know how that's going to pass to. And retail. I know the city had say they don't want any retail in Pelham, but I don't know what is the penalty, or if some people could be above the law or whatever, how that's going to happen. Because worldwide in the US and whatever, cannabis is expanding very fast, and we're worried, you know, that even if there's law, I don't know how they're going to fit in those bylaws or whatever about the retail. So I know I've got lots of questions in there, but.
Okay, thank you. So there was a lot of questions in there.
Yes.
So I'm going to first turn to Mr. McDonald again to just run through the process, why we're here tonight, what the purpose of the meeting is tonight, and what we hope to do. And then I might call on my colleague, Jennifer Sturton, in-house counsel, to just address some of the other questions you had, if you're comfortable with some of those, Jennifer. So first, Mr. McDonald, if you want to just run through that again, please.
Yes, there were a lot of questions there, and so I'll try my best to get the ones that apply to me. So again, this bylaw is intended to apply to future applications, future cannabis companies who want to come to the town of Pelham. And as I mentioned, the Redecan property and the Can Trust property were existing and operating when the new bylaws were prepared. And as you heard, they become grandfathered.
But it's a new owner.
It doesn't matter. A land use permission goes with the land. It doesn't go with the person. So that's something you should be aware of, and perhaps the other individual has a comment on that. So.
And what about the fact that the permit were expired?
I can't comment on the building permit. That's not something I deal with, and I don't work for the town. So I'm an external
Well,
consultant.
maybe Mr. Cribb or somebody else can answer that question.
Well, as I said, I'm going to ask if Mr. McDonald's finished with his explanation of why we're here tonight for this zoning bylaw.
Okay.
Then I'll turn to my colleague, our in-house counsel, Jennifer Sturton, to talk to some of those other questions that
Okay,
she
so
feels
sorry.
comfortable.
So again, the zoning bylaw, back to why the OLT, the June 17, was not, the notice wasn't sent, and that anything additional could have been added rather than missing the deadline. And, you know, I have to pay other lawyers' fee or whatever from our taxes. So just want to know why.
Okay, I can't speak to all of the complexities around what Redecan was supposed to provide, but I can tell you that at the hearing that I was at, Redecan wanted to expand its operation,
Correct.
build additional warehouse space, and build an office, a head office for its operation. And we said, I'm just talking in layman's terms. We said, yes, okay, provided you do certain things. And those certain things were established in minutes of settlement, which is an agreement between Redecan and the town. However, those minutes of settlement went with a zoning bylaw that was repealed by town council when it did a new bylaw. So it sounds very complicated, right? But let me finish.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, there was no zoning bylaw in effect on June 17th applying to the Redecan site. And for whatever reason, Redecan made the decision it did to not produce what the town was looking for. And I can't speak to that because that's all I know. But it doesn't matter because the new bylaw does not permit Redecan to expand its operation. It doesn't allow them to expand their warehouse or build a new office for their operation. So the new bylaw does not do that.
Okay, so if Redecan cannot expand and they were legal not conforming, how come the new owner that's legal non-conforming can expand?
So just to be clear, that CanTrust and Redecan are two different things.
Okay.
Redecan is a legal non-conforming use, and with this bylaw would not be permitted to expand because it's a legal non-conforming use, and they would have to go to the Committee of Adjustment and get a minor variance or go to council and get zoning approval. So that's Redecan.
Okay.
CanTrust has a building permit on file that allows them to expand even though they're a legal non-conforming use. That sounds very complicated. I know, I get that. And perhaps someone else can help with answering the building permit question.
So I'm going to turn to Jennifer now, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think I'd like to start at the beginning of your questions where you were asking about the federal government pointing at the municipality and the municipality going back, pointing backwards. So the federal government is the primary regulator of all matters cannabis related. They legalized it in 2018 through the Cannabis Act for recreational use. Before that, it was permitted for medical use in certain circumstances. So the federal government created the Cannabis Act and then two sets of regulations. So one of your other questions was the difference between cannabis and industrial hemp. And there are, in fact, two separate sets of regulations from the federal government under the Cannabis Act. One is for cannabis, the other is for hemp. So that's the role of the federal government, and part of the Cannabis Act does speak to odor, but there's not any sort of implementation measures that have been enacted by the federal government. So that's the first level. Then secondly, when the federal government allowed recreational use of cannabis to become legal, it then downloaded to the provincial government the responsibility for distribution. So retail stores and so on are regulated by the provincial government. And when that happened, the AGCO, the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, which is the government agency effectively that deals with the retail piece, they offered every municipality in Ontario the chance to opt out of having retail stores in their boundaries, and Pelham did that.
Correct.
Of the 444 municipalities, I think there were 100 and some that opted out. You could always opt back in later, which we have not done, but there was no, you could opt out later if you opt in now. So that's the provincial piece. Okay. They have two pieces of legislation that deal with it. Then that leaves municipalities, and our toolbox that we've talked about a bit is actually quite limited. So what we're here to talk about tonight is the zoning bylaw, and that's land use, right? So that's not odor, it's not light, it's how the land can be used. And so Mr. McDonald has explained that quite well. And then the other sort of lever or tool that the town would have at the municipal level would be the odorous industries nuisance bylaw, which you've heard council is going to revisit in the hopes of trying to give it a bit more teeth and try and satisfy the concerns that we've raised tonight. So that becomes a bylaw enforcement piece. So that's really what we have available to us at the municipal level to try and address some of these concerns. I will also note that the federal government is the one that issues licenses to growers to produce cannabis.
Correct.
So that's not something that we can control either. So it's a lot of it, the regulation, what's permitted and not permitted sort of as a whole is outside the scope of the municipality's authority. Then another question that you had asked is about the legal non-conforming use. And as we've talked about, anything that existed when the interim control bylaw and was implemented, they do have some protection. I would suggest that it's not entirely unlimited. There are some legal tests that apply if a legal non-conforming use is going to expand. But again, that's outside the scope of what we're talking about tonight. And then with respect to the building permit piece, as Mr. McDonald's indicated, the building permit sort of applies to the land, and it's effectively property. It's something that has value. So it's not something that is easily rescinded, revoked. The fact that it's expired doesn't render it valueless, and so it's not as straightforward as perhaps has been suggested. And then I don't know if the question about why the final OLT order wasn't requested was not answered to your satisfaction. I'm guessing by the expression that not. So I'm actually looking at the report that was published on the agenda for this evening, and it's the second page, and it sets out the explanation as follows, that in April 2023, the new zoning bylaw that was approved by Council in August of 2022 came into effect. And the reason that there was that delay was because there was an unrelated appeal. So the new zoning bylaw replaces the prior zoning bylaw in its entirety and all amendments, and that includes those approved by the OLT in the interim decision. This creates a procedural issue, which we're here tonight to address, because the former bylaw, including amendments, is no longer operative. And the new zoning bylaw that we're here to amend tonight, as stated in the report, is not before the OLT.
So we're between the two.
Exactly.
Okay, so our question, the other question is, if Health Canada, if the new owner asks a license to Health Canada, they're going to say, we're going to give you a license, but you have to obey the bylaws. Is there bylaws right now?
Well, there is. The Odorous Industries Nuisance Bylaw does the Odorous Industries Nuisance Bylaw does exist currently. There has been, Council has received comments that perhaps it's not as strict or as effective as residents would like it to be, and that's why, as you've heard, Council is going to revisit that. So, and also, once the zoning bylaw amendment is passed, if there's someone, if there's a new producer that gets a Health Canada license and a condition of that license is compliance with municipal bylaws, then yes, the zoning bylaw, once amended and passed, will apply.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but initially, was it not just Redican and Cantrust, the only two in Pelham? And now anybody that have the distance and will be able to come into Pelham? If they follow the bylaws?
I think, thank you. I think I'm going to refer that back to Mr. McDonald because I think that's a planning question that does relate to our zoning bylaw amendment that we're considering. So thanks for that, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer.
I'll turn it back to you, Mr. McDonald.
The simple answer is no. The official plan amendment that was also approved by the OLT very clearly says that new cannabis uses require a rezoning. So anybody wanting to come in and develop a new cannabis use has to make an application to council to rezone their property. And through that process, there would be public meetings like these where everyone can come and speak to the proposal.
Okay, so that's the bylaw with the OLT. Are we still linked to the OLT or we're not because we didn't send a notice?
No, so the notice has nothing to do with what I just said.
Okay.
The official plan amendment was also approved by the Ontario Land Tribunal, and it clearly states that any new cannabis operation requires a rezoning. So if somebody came knocking on the town's door, the town would say, go look at the official plan amendment, you have to apply for a rezoning, and you have to do all these studies. So no new operation can set up unless they get their property rezoned.
Thank you.
So thank you. We've more than exceeded your specific time limit, but you asked a lot of relevant questions that we've heard earlier in the meeting, so it was an opportunity to maybe address some of those. So thank you for that. But I'd ask anybody else now that has questions or wants to comment on the proposed zoning bylaw to come forward.
I do have a quick question. It's more of a follow-up, I think, for Helene. And it's Barry Shannon from Cherry Ridge. In regards to the expansion or the building permits for the expansion of the former CanTrust property, are there any actions? Because all I've heard, frankly, is how the cannabis companies are protected by certain guidelines and rules and bylaws. But are there any actions that the town would take on behalf of concerned citizens to revoke those building permits?
So thank you for the question. I don't think we're going to address that this evening. That's a process that's covered under the Ontario Building Code and under the jurisdiction of the chief building official for the town. So it would be us overstating our authority and putting that in a position where we can't give you an answer on that. So
appreciate it, but would it be something you would look at? I don't want specifics, but would it be something, because there's obviously huge concern from citizens, that you'd be willing to at least investigate revoking them?
Yeah, and again, I don't think we're in a position to comment on that. I can only give you assurances that council hears the concerns of the community and are looking at all the tools that are available to it under law to try and address the concerns that its citizens have.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity. Now I see a gentleman coming forward.
I'm Steve Seam. I live at 59 Rolling Meadows. Just a couple of comments. The issue of transparency has obviously come up a few times in regards to different things that people say have happened and haven't happened and whatever. And I know we can get into specific bylaw issues and all of that, but for my professional life, I'm always very aware that we are trusting you totally. When I was in professional positions, people trusted me to do the best I could to protect them. And this whole community here wants to be protected. I mean, we've chosen this place to live, to raise our children and all of that. So we want this to be the best environment that it can be. That's why we chose it to be here. And so there's a lot of trust in you. The issue of transparency, I think, is a little subtle thing that kind of runs through this. And I'm just wondering if there's ways that you could improve the transparency of messages so that people are very aware of the paths that are being followed, any, the little strategies that are being used, because we are trusting you totally to be our champion for our life that's here. So that's all. I'm just not sure what that looks like, but I'm just saying it's something, a message that I keep getting, kind of hits me in terms of, we trust you. Please help us to be clear about what you're doing so that we feel that we can trust you. Okay?
I'm Paul Bryant. I live halfway between Redecan and CanTrust. And I'd like you to make something very clear about this order. We're not talking about lifting the lid on the cottage cheese and going, gee, I think that smells. My wife gets a migraine at a certain level of this. And I have called in and written in, and I had the town, somebody phoned me and said, oh, I checked the wind on that day and it wasn't blowing in your direction. It must be your neighbors. Well, my closest neighbor's over 400 feet away. So I don't know what they're doing over there, but boy, to travel in the wind at 400 feet. So the level of frustration with this is that here we are, what is it, 5 years? How long have we been chasing this? And we're still in the same boat. We'll still smell it on the way home. I don't understand. And you people are our leaders. I remember being at one of the Pelham Council meetings that we had down off, I forget what street it was, but anyways, they had Ted Meridian came and did the MC of what we were talking about, whatever the topic was. Anyways, at one point he says, I don't know why you people don't believe the our leadership up there, they all live in Pelham. And then somebody else shouted out, no, they don't. And so they went through the roll, and 1 out of 9 lived in Pelham. So when you don't live near it or don't live close enough to smell this, at the intensity that we smell it at, and the different times of day that it pours out, kids at school, just as that other gentleman said, their clothing reeks of it. I know of a guy that went to work and he was accused of being on pot. And he says, no, it's a smell from where I live. Well, do you think the employer readily believed that? So that's what we're at here. We're not just filling in an evening to discuss something that, gee, kind of frustrating. No, this is very high level frustration. Thank you.
Hi, Mark Brulé from Balsam Street in Welland. We're directly east of Redecan. I missed part of the meeting, but a summary thought in my mind is this. I appreciate all of the work that the Cannabis Control Committee did, and I have no doubt, as we've heard them express some of their own frustrations. However, there are a lot of things that look good on paper, but in real-world scenarios are different. There's a running joke that engineers don't make mistakes, they just make improvements. All of the work that they did is really, really great. But now we're in a position where there's a whole community of real life experience that says what we are experiencing is a clear marker that the standards that have been set seem to be insufficient for the well-being of our community. And so what I would ask for consideration is not to ignore all of the work that they did, but to consider the fact that our experience should be the louder voice rather than all of the paperwork and research that has been done. It's what we're living that's real, not what's on paper that's real. Thank you.
It's a comment I got from many residents asking why is the council meeting or at 9 o'clock in the morning where most of them work. And also, I believe other cities have a question period. And is that other council can have question period and ours don't? So I was asked that question, I did not answer.
So again, council made the determination what worked for the municipal corporation as far as their board meetings, the council meetings go. And there's 440 municipalities, and you can find some that do and some that don't, some morning, some day meetings, some evening meetings. So there's no standard format for that. But again, a little outside of our scope tonight, but if you have those questions, all the councillors' information is posted on the town's website. And if you have concerns about the times of meetings or whether or not there's a question period, those are questions that you address to council, and council would consider them.
Just I got that question by many residents. They would attend council meeting if they were at night because they're working. Thank you.
And again, the council is the one that you should direct those concerns to.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any additional comments?
Good evening to the council, to the staff, to residents of Fawn Hill. My name is Ron Burkout. I am the Chief Operations Officer for the new owners of the former Can Trust site. So I am now instantly the most hated man in this room.
I think I could give you a run for that.
Again, I appreciate everyone's time. Mr. McDonald on the zoning bylaw amendments, Ms. Sturton on your explanations of everything. What I want to say to the city and to the residents of Pelham, I am a Niagara Region resident. I live in Niagara Falls. I'm actually, as part of my contract, I negotiated to live in the home that is on the property at the old Can Trust site. And what I would like to propose and put forth to all the residents and the concerns that you have here, and I have heard them all. I've been in the cannabis industry since day one. I was actually part of the team that wrote the original legislation back in 2017. I've also been in the greenhouses since I was a child. I'm first generation Dutch Canadian. I'm familiar with the Balfour site before when it grew calancholos. I was familiar with it when it was sold to CanTrust. And what I would like to do at this time is to extend an open invitation to council, staff, and any citizen that wishes to come by and has questions about what we are doing, what we have done, how we acquired the property. Our door is always open. I've heard the word transparency here a few times tonight. We want to be very transparent. I just want to say to anyone that's here, if you come by the facility, you see cars in the parking lot, please stop in. My door is always open. I will openly address any concerns that anyone has. I will take you through tours of the facility before we get plants in there, and I will let you know exactly what our plans are, especially when it comes to the expansion and the permits, and I can explain to you exactly how those permits from a business side are still affected. So please, anyone, if you see cars in the parking lot, more than happy to come by. I will gladly take any time out of my day to answer any questions. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. So I think, we've been at this for 2 hours. Unless there's any pressing concerns that people haven't heard already in presentations or questions, I'm going to turn to our Deputy Clerk and see if we've received any written correspondence via email tonight in relation to the public meeting.
We've received no emails.
3 emails?
No emails.
No emails. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to wrap up the meeting, and I'm going to reiterate the fact that written comments can be submitted to council prior to their making a decision. Our targeted timeline is to have the public report with all the comments with the staff recommendations before them for the July 10th meeting. And I would encourage you, if you want to follow up in writing, that's not a bad thing to do. It again becomes part of the public record. And in the event of appeals before the OLT, it doesn't hurt that we have that public sentiment on record for council. So I'm not going to speak on behalf of council, but I'm going to speak on behalf of council. So I think council is all in attendance tonight. I've been in meetings with them. I hear their frustrations. They deal with a complex process. We only have a certain amount of tools. If they could snap their fingers and solve this problem, it wouldn't be before us tonight. They continue to work on it. They brought the issue about odors to staff. They hope to have a discussion into more stringent guidelines. And again, a gentleman commented on that tonight. There will be a public process. You can appear as a delegation, and I think council has heard the request that maybe a public meeting might be beneficial in that regard. So follow the updates and the developments on our website, and I want to thank you tonight for your participation. I want to thank Mr. McDonald for coming down and reiterating that the work of the Cannabis Control Committee is being brought forward and is consistent with all the activities that council has done in the past to try and control this issue in our lovely community. Thank you very much and have a good evening.